Multiple sources describe the state of PMO as a quote-unquote show, as key staff who worked with Carney before and during the election wait to see which job they'll be offered during. Well, the veil has been lifted on the Prime Minister's office. Well, first off, we find out his chief of staff is deciding to leave and will leave likely at the end of June. Then we find out that Carney's doing things that are out of the norm of what a prime minister should be doing. We'll be talking about that. And then we'll be getting into how those in the Liberal Party are beginning to feel about the early days of Mark Carney, and, well, it might be getting a little unsettling. We'll be talking about this and so much more. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. I'm grateful to be with you once again. Please, if you take the time to like, share, and subscribe, it really helps the show, helps us to grow, and helps us get the message out, and gives us an alternative point of view that the mainstream media does not currently offer. Now let's get into the first story, shall we? So this is the one you probably heard of already. Micromanager, who joined Mark Carney back in March to be his chief of staff, at least temporarily, they said. Temporarily. We didn't know. It was one of those, we'll see how it goes type of moments. They said kind of temporary, not really when it happened. And then, Micromanager decided to opt for, let's make it temporary. And he bounced yesterday. And so this was the thing. People were really, we covered it here on the show about how weird of an appointment that really was. And bringing Marco, of all people, back was a choice. And now Marco's deciding, being the chief of staff of Mark Carney is not exactly what I want to be doing. And so he decided to say, you know what, bye-bye, I'm out of here. And we are now left with this. Carney, unable to find permanent chief of staff after courting high-profile candidates. Nobody wants that job. It is kind of fascinating, isn't it? This is kind of kicking off what we're going to be covering today. This is just the little layer on top of how much deeper we're going to get in terms of how people are feeling right now around Mark Carney. He's a little different. He said he was going to be different than Justin Trudeau, and well, he's a lot different than what the party thought they were going to be getting with Mark Carney. It's actually kind of fascinating to be watching. So here, high-profile candidates. We'll get into it here. It says Prime Minister Mark Carney has been unable to find a permanent chief of staff and is keeping former cabinet minister Micromanager in the government's top political job only until the end of June, two sources say. A number of senior Liberals, including Justin Trudeau's former principal secretary, Gerald Butts, veteran ministerial chief of staff, Cyrus reporter, and former United Nations ambassador Marc-Andre Blanchard, were approached to take on the job but declined, according to the sources. Mr. Carney has since decided to keep Mr. Mendicino as interim chief of staff until the end of June parliamentary session, as the search continues for someone with the breadth of experience to handle the position's onerous responsibilities. And as we'll learn today, we'll find out exactly why no one wants this job. It's easy to be like, it's because Mark Carney sucks. That's why. I was like, there's more to it than that. First off, the job is demanding. Secondly, Mark Carney himself is demanding, and no one wants to deal with that. As Robert Fife continues on to the story, says the position of permanent chief of staff is one of the most important jobs in politics. A chief of staff provides stability, particularly for a government with a new leader and an ambitious agenda. The individual has great influence over ministers, caucus, and the bureaucracy as both a motivator and an enforcer of government policy. One of the two sources say that Matthew Bouchard, a former top advisor to Mr. Trudeau, has not ruled out taking on the job. Tom Pitfield, who oversaw the Liberal election campaign along with Mr. Butts, and campaign manager Andrew Bevan, is interim principal secretary, but he is also not expected to stay past June. The government has also begun selecting chiefs of staff for cabinet ministers, the sources said, and those names are expected to be released next week. The list is being overseen by the PMO, Prime Minister's Office. The lack of a permanent chief of staff makes it difficult to permanently fill top positions in the PMO, as a number of senior people, such as Foreign Policy Advisor Scott Gilmore, only signed on for short-term stints until the election was over. Other experienced Liberals may not wish to join the PMO until they know who they will be working for under as chief of staff. Off to a tough start. As you see here, there are some onerous responsibilities, as it was said and stated here, of being a chief of staff. One of which is, you really got to be on top of messaging. You have to be on top of the other ministers. You have to be on top of what's going on in the party and on top of who is saying what. You know what happened the other day? Stephen Guilbeault saying, we will not be doing pipelines. And then the Minister of Housing saying, we need to keep housing prices where they are. And Mark Carney, quite frankly, said the opposite, at least in public. And it wasn't looking good. And that's a situation where a chief of staff has to come in and be like, all right, guys, sure, we have the party whip, but that's mainly for House Commons type stuff. But for chief of staff, they are on top of everything. And there's a lot of details that come with it. And you have to be a jerk. You have to be disliked. You kind of have to be the enforcer, as they say. And who really wants that job? And not only the enforcer of the PMO, you have to be the enforcer for Mark Carney, who has been getting a bit of a reputation of being a little bit of a jerk. So we move over here. It's inside Mark Carney's PMO, where ministers get called out, punctuality matters, and patience is on short supply. When you read these characteristics, you kind of read them, say, okay, if you were to take Mark Carney's name out of it and replace it with someone, I don't know, like Pierre Poilievre, maybe Donald Trump, however you're feeling, replace it with the name of someone that you prefer. You would see these qualities as a good thing. You would see like, okay, yeah, you know what? Government needs to shape up. This Justin Trudeau-led thing was a gong show. We need to get things together. We need to get this thing figured out. That's typically how you would read it. But if Mark Carney's name's there, you're just like, wow, he's just a jerk. Yeah, I'm just saying, always check your bias first, and then we start digging into it. That's really the key first, right? So you kind of read these and be like, okay, well, punctuality is a good thing. Ministers are getting called out. That's important. We want to see that. We want to see people held accountable. And patience is on short supply. Well, that may not be a good thing. National Post spoke with half a dozen current and former PMO officials, senior bureaucrats, and caucus members. And my friends, this article is so juicy. This is where it gets fun. This is where it's like, okay, this is where some real Mark Carney stuff starts coming out like, okay, that's how it's going to go. Okay. And so this is very, very fascinating. Because here they talk to some of these staffers, right? And they say and describe Mark Carney as being someone who is extremely focused. National Post spoke with half a dozen current and former PMO officials, senior bureaucrats, and caucus members. All were granted anonymity to discuss internal workings of government openly. And this is where it gets interesting. They describe Carney as extremely focused on delivering an ambitious agenda of reshaping the Canadian economy in the era of U.S. Donald Trump. He is fiercely punctual, runs a tight ship during meetings, and is decisive, all marked differences from his predecessor. Gone is the indecision that marred Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office, with important decision documents often sitting weeks or months on the desk of Chief of Staff Katie Telford. Some bottlenecks still exist, but they are more the product of an understaffed PMO's office serving a political neophyte. Decision-making is not a problem, said one senior government official, describing Carney as task-focused and for whom results matter. He does not suffer fools. The official added, a common refrain among all sources. As I said, to start this thing off, there seems to be a different culture around. Things are a little more tighter. Things are a little more, let's get this thing figured out. Let's get this thing focused. Again, if you read those opening sentences, you're just like, okay, I could get on board with this. For those who have been really annoyed with how much money's being wasted, those who have been especially upset by how little time the MPs have been sitting in Parliament this year, you're seeing this and make, okay, maybe something's going to change. I'm not a fan of Mark Carney, not a fan of the Liberal Party, but maybe something could change here. Maybe. The problem is, Mark Carney says he's working for Canadians, says he is, but we've seen his actions dictate other. So, you can say that, yes, he's running a tight ship. Yes, people are getting called out. Yes, he's doing his job, making sure people are sticking to their promises. Yes, but is that for Canadians, or is that for running his own agenda, which is where it starts getting weird? As we continue to read on here, these insiders say, yeah, he runs a tight ship, and he runs such a tight ship that we could be expecting another cabinet reshuffle inside 8 months. 8 months! Isn't that nuts? But the Prime Minister is already bearing the signs of a potential micromanager. And this is where it's like, yeah, you read that title like, okay, those are positive traits, and then you realize, not so much. But the Prime Minister is already bearing the signs of a potential micromanager, wanting to review or rework documents or communications products that should be well below the purview of a Prime Minister. He is also short on patience and highly demanding of his advisors, senior bureaucrats, and cabinet members, while not afraid of calling out underperforming members of his entourage. Whereas there was a sense on Trudeau's entourage in office that he would give people multiple kicks of the can if they provided a subpar briefing or weren't on top of their files. Sources say Carney is not so patient. Get it right the first time or risk not being called on for the topic again. Carney filled half of his 28-member cabinet with new faces last week, but all the sources say no one's job, not even veteran ministers, is safe. If ministers don't perform to Carney's expectations or fail to find ways to deliver on their mandates quickly, they may not last the year at the table. And this isn't necessarily a good thing for the country. If things are always going to be moving and always going to be changing the PMO and the only face that's going to be consistent is Mark Carney's, then who's doing the job? What is going on? And again, you can see it from both sides. One is like, okay, just he knows what he's doing. He's make sure he's staying on top of people, blah, 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 blah. Or you can see it as he has his own agenda. He's getting people around him that are loyalists. He's getting people around him that only care about pleasing him. Where is this going? This is starting to get very interesting as we dig into this more and more. Because you can see right here, they call him a micromanager. He's getting involved in documents and reports that he shouldn't be getting involved in. Why is he getting so involved? Why is he getting down to the grassroots? You can say, again, as any good CEO would do, he looks to the top and bottom of everything that's going on, make sure things are running the way he wants them to be run. Some would see that as a good thing. Some would see that as, that seems weird. Depends who you are. But this quote was probably the most damning of them all. This guy will not have patience, and that's the thing. That's why we think there will be a shuffle at some point in the next 8 months or something. Not within the next 8 months, but in like 8 months' time or something like that. Less than a year, a Liberal MP said. If you're that ambitious as a leader, you're not going to have a lot of time for people who are failing at their files. He's going to find replacements, you would think, but let's see, the MP added. As a new politician, sources say Carney is not yet fully aware of what he needs and doesn't need to know. The result is that he will ask to read documents that the Prime Minister shouldn't need to review or generate an abundance of back and forths demanding staff rewrite briefing notes to his liking, two sources detailed. He's too deep in the details already, said the former Liberal staffer, adding they were frequently surprised by some of the material Carney demanded to see. Another concern among Liberals is that days before the House of Commons is set to resume, Carney's office is still surprisingly understaffed. And then we move down here. Multiple sources describe the state of PMO as a quote-unquote shit show. As key staff who worked with Carney before and during the election wait to see which job they'll be offered during his parliament. Things, as you get deeper and deeper, as again, you started off the article, oh, things are very organized, he knows what he wants, he's detail-oriented, and then you find out more and more, he seems to be more in over his head than anything. You can see as a CEO getting down to the grassroots of everything. But what's more so being communicated as he doesn't know what he's doing. He's a little lost in what his actual role is. So in some ways, he's doing busy work to make it look like he knows what he's doing. That's what's communicating as here. And then when you have key staff saying, things are a mess in the PMO right now. People don't know what they're doing. People don't know what's going on. Does that sound like someone who is a leader or someone who is thrown into the deep end, not realizing what they signed up for? There's a reason I started off this show trying to show both sides, trying to be fair down the line. Because then when you find out, as you get deeper and deeper, you find out, all right, this isn't a good start for him. And the fact that people are already talking about a cabinet shuffle happening inside of a year shows there is a lot more chaos going on within that Liberal Party. It showed with the likes of Guilbeault. It showed with the likes of Gregor Robertson, who were not speaking the same language that Mark Carney was speaking. And now people don't know what their jobs are. They don't know what their roles are. Mark Carney's asking for documents that people are like, why are you asking for these documents? That doesn't even really concern you. You should be focused on these things. We'll see where this goes. But more was coming out as the Sun covered. Blanket mandate letter worrying sign for Carney era, observers say. They interviewed former MP Kevin Vaughan. He told the Toronto Sun the decision to issue a single mandate letter instead of the customary individual directives to each cabinet member is yet another concerning diversion from the norm that's become typical of the Prime Minister's office under Carney. There's no budget, no itineraries, and no mandate letters. Somebody should tell Prime Minister Carney that that's not how a democracy works, he says. By refusing to share, we have no choice but to ask, what does he have to hide? Is there something in his minister's mandate letters that he doesn't want Canadians to see? Mandate letters typically are pretty important because what happens with these mandate letters, as Mark Carney's been loving the word mandate these days, is that it gives a set of directives. It gives a set of tangible goals to each minister of what they are looking to accomplish with their specific files. If they don't have these, then what are they working towards? He issues one single mandate letter, and it had 7 points to it. And they are all very vague points. Sounded good, but they're very vague points. Establishing a new economic and security relationship with the United States, building one Canadian economy by removing barriers to interprovincial trade, bringing down costs for Canadians and helping them to get ahead, making housing more affordable by unleashing the power of public-private cooperation, protecting Canadian sovereignty, keeping Canadians safe by strengthening the Canadian armed forces, attracting the best talent in the world to help build our economy, spending less on government operations so that Canadians can invest more in the people and businesses that will build the strongest economy in the G7. leaders. These are all very vague points. They sound great, sure, but how are you going to be actioning these things? That's typically what mandate letters are for. And then all he does is issue this one mandate letter that all his ministers need to work towards. So whatever file you're working on, yeah, just try to make sure it's tied to one of these 7 objectives. I'm not going to give you any specific objectives for your job. I'm just going to tell you, just figure out how to tie it to this. It seems to be a lack of leadership there, lack of clarity, lack of focus. What is actually going on? And that's been essentially what this past week leading up to next week, as Parliament resumes for a couple weeks, is leading to. The PMO, people don't know what their jobs are. You don't have a chief of staff and a job that nobody wants under you. You're asking for files that people are confused that you're asking for. You don't issue mandate letters. You don't issue a budget, but yet you're micromanaging everybody under you. Those are not signs of a strong leader. Those are not signs of someone who knows what's going on and what's happening. I've worked in, and I'm sure many of you have worked a variety of different jobs and a variety of different organizations. Anytime someone's micromanaging is usually a sign they're not a strong leader. And sure, they might get things done in the interim, but the goals never get accomplished. And so that's what we're currently seeing. No one wants your chief of staff job. You can't fill the jobs in the PMO right now. People are confused when you're asking for specific documents that you really shouldn't be getting into. You're not issuing the documents that you should be focused on, and yet you want everyone to tie and be focused on your agenda. And he said this agenda is for bettering Canada, restructuring the economy. 3 economies into 1 economy. That was the big thing, right? Well, he also made 28 mandate letters into 1. What does that tell you? There is going to be a focus on consolidating power to the PMO office. That's where this is going. It could be the liberals and the media are going to dress it up as like, oh, he's certain of what he's doing. He knows what's going on. He's certain. He's holding everyone accountable. He's only holding them accountable to his vision of restructuring Canada's economy, but not to the benefit of Canadians. But likely it's going to be to the benefit of many multinational corporations that he is shown to benefit from. We'll find out, hopefully at some point, what his personal finances are saying and how he's going to be benefiting from decisions that he might be making. This is the start. And you can be discouraged, you can be encouraged by this. I am encouraged by it because it's been kind of goes in line with everything I've been saying. That party's delicate. You can say what you want. Yeah, they won an election, but they're delicate. Mark Carney coming in and just kind of knocking heads because people aren't satisfying his agenda. I don't know it's going to go too well for him. And the fact that no one wants to take his chief of staff job should tell you a lot at this point. So anyways, enjoy your Friday. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.